Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to Spokane, Julia Sweeney.
Thank you. I really think I could become a ballerina. I'm turning 63 soon, and I don't think it's too late. Because I believe in myself. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Oh my God. Okay, so that music that you just heard is from Baroque and Blues, the album. And it's Claude Bolling who wrote it, and Jean-Pierre Rampal on flute. And that came out in 1975. And I was in high school at Gonzaga Prep, a junior. And I thought that was very sophisticated music, practically classical. And I listened to it over and over and decided that I wanted to play the flute. So I asked for a flute for Christmas, and I got it. And I found out that at Gonzaga Prep, they would teach you free music lessons. So one day I went in, and there's this guy, this really sort of drab, stoop-shouldered, expressionless guy. And as he was showing me how to position the flute, he said, "You have very good lips for blowing." And I said, "Oh my God." I can't believe this clueless older dude said that. I can't wait to tell my girlfriends. And I immediately told them. We all laughed. What an oblivious guy. So out of it to say it, something like that. About an hour later, I was walking down the hallway. A bunch of guys were leaning against the locker. And they said, "Hey, Sweeney, we hear you have really good lips for blowing." And I said, "Yeah, I know. Can you believe that clueless older guy said that?" And they said, "Good lips for blowing." And I said, "Okay, we're laughing at that guy because what he said was so dumb and clueless." And they said, "Lips for blowing." And I learned a very important lesson in that moment, that there's a very fine line between being laughed with and laughed at. And I wanted to be on the with side of things very much. 40 years later, my daughter comes to me with my high school yearbook and says, "Mom, a lot of people in here write, you have very good lips for blowing." And I said, "Oh, that is a very funny story. I was taking flute lessons." She goes, "You know what? Stop. Just, I don't want to know. Just, it's okay." God. I'm so happy to be back in a theater. I feel like I've been hibernating for 2 years with the quarantine and the pandemic and everything. And I have missed, it's like live theater. There's just nothing like it. I've missed it the most. And as soon as I could, I got tickets in downtown Los Angeles to see a theater show. It's one of those old Broadway Art Deco theaters in downtown LA. And it had these 2 big grand staircases that went down to the basement where the bathrooms are. And I got there early, and I was going down the staircase, and I noticed this older woman walking down the other staircase. We sort of acknowledged each other. And then I got down towards the bottom, and then it was like we were weirdly going to land at the same moment at the same place. So I kind of stepped to the left, and then she stepped in the same direction. We laughed. And then I took another step and realized I was looking into a mirror. Oh, my God. I was the old lady walking down the steps. That's what the quarantine did. Okay, to give myself credit, I took it in. I mean, I just stood there and looked in the mirror and said, okay, older self, I see you arrived here at the theater. Touché. Good choice. I see you took your time walking down the steps holding the railing. You wouldn't want to have a fall. I realize when you're young, you say things like, I tripped and fell, and then you get to this certain age and you say, I've had a fall. Now, I really shouldn't have been upset by this because I've always felt kind of old inside. Like, in a way, I feel like my personality has finally met up with how I look on the outside. Like, I feel like in kindergarten, when I looked in the mirror, this was the face that looked back at me. And I think I had a kind of older woman vibe, very young. I could imagine that Sister Mary Kevin in the 2nd grade, when she was writing down students' names and attributes, she wrote Julie Sweeney, matronly. Which I don't think is bad. Now, a lot of people say that if you're an older woman in American society, especially if you have gray hair like I have, you're invisible. And I'm here to say that that is 100% true. But my question is, why is that a bad thing? Why isn't that the greatest thing? I mean, I really don't want people to pay attention to me unless I'm on a stage like I am right now, or I'm trying to get service of some kind. Otherwise, I would prefer it if people just ignored me. And in some ways, looking like this, I feel like I have a superpower. Like, I'm Casper the Friendly Ghost, and it's fantastic. During the quarantine, I was standing in line to go into Trader Joe's, and they were limiting the people that were going in, and this woman was standing like a couple feet in front of me, and she turned around and started talking to her friend who was right behind me, 2 feet right into my face, as if I wasn't there. And I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. I don't even have to awkwardly eavesdrop anymore. I can just stand there and hear everything. And I learned that this young woman is dating a new man who is uncircumcised, and I guess it doesn't feel any different. I'm so happy to be back here at the Fox Theater in particular. This theater means so much to me. This is where I had my first job. At 16, I sold popcorn and candy, and I was an usherette. Yes, yes! And my dear friends Dina and Darcy were working here, and they got me the job. And Dina recently reminded me that we were told to pop 1 vat of popcorn in the popcorn maker so that the aroma would fill the lobby. And then we were told to drag out these big bags of industrial-made popcorn that tasted like cardboard and stuff the popcorn maker with that. I'd forgotten that. She also told me that during the lull, while the movie was playing, we would entertain each other by stuffing popcorn up our nose and then turning in dramatic and surprising ways and blowing it out. I don't really remember that, but I believe her. I thought, oh yes, the early comedy stylings of Julia Sweeney, the sophistication, the wit. Also, this was a triplex then. They had 2 theaters upstairs. The Fox has had a lot of work done. It's kind of funny. I moved to Hollywood, didn't have any work done. Fox stayed in Spokane, had a lot of work done. Here's a tip I've learned in Hollywood, and it is, don't tell the Fox directly that you've noticed it's got a lot of work done. Don't say something like, your ears and eyebrows are in all new places. Say something like, have you been working out recently? Did you drop the sugar? You look great. But not only that, this is the theater where I saw my first movie. I came here in 1965 and saw The Sound of Music with my Aunt Barbara. And it was so incredible to me. The hills really are alive. The Sound of Music. I loved it so much. And then on a very wintry, very cold, snowy day, on a December Sunday in 1968, my parents dropped 4 of us kids off here to see the Yellow Submarine, which was very exciting, the Beatles. And our family had a 67 VW bus that was red. And after the movie, we all 4 of us stood outside, and my dad came and picked us up without my mother. And when we got into the bus, he said, "You have a new baby brother." You guys, it wasn't until years later that I realized my mom was in labor. They dropped us off at the movies because my mom was in labor. I was so oblivious. I was probably knocking on the passenger window door saying, "Mom, do you have an extra $1 for goobers?" And my mom was probably going, "Ah! Look in my purse." In 1971, the whole family, all 7 of us, plus Aunt Barbara, came here. We sat over there, around there on the edge, and we saw Fiddler on the Roof. Oh, I loved it so much. I remember we each had our own individual brown paper lunch bag of popcorn, the oil seeping through, obscuring the names that were written, scratched out in Big Pen. And as the lights went down, I was probably saying to my mom, "Meg has Bill's popcorn and Mike has Jim's popcorn." And my mom was probably saying, "It doesn't matter, Julie." I loved Fiddler on the Roof so much. You might say every one of us is like a fiddler on the roof, trying to scratch out a simple tune without breaking our neck. Afterwards, I said to my mom, "Are there still Jews in the world? I mean, I thought maybe they were just a Bible people." And my mother said, "Oh, yes. Well, not in Spokane. But in New York." And in the 60s and 70s, in this very theater, on Saturday mornings, starting at 10 a.m., they had a double feature matinee for kids for 50 cents. And it was here that I saw, The Love Bug and Herbie Rides Again, and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And it's where I fell in love with Don Knotts, and the shakiest gun in the West, and the ghost and Mr. Chicken, and the incredible Mr. Limpet. If there's one thing you can say about Mr. Limpet, it's that he's incredible. I also saw here one of my favorite movies of all time, a great guilty pleasure, The Trouble with Angels, with Haley Mills. Oh, yes. Do you remember her? She goes to the convent Catholic high school. She is trouble. But at the end, she decides to become a nun. And I think for this short time in high school when I wanted to be a nun, 85% of the reason was because of Haley Mills. Plus, I knew from The Sound of Music that if things didn't work out, if you became a problem that had to be solved like Maria, you could just go over the hill and there would be Christopher Plummer with his whistle and his 8 children who are going to love you. That whistle, so sexy and disturbing. Anyway, so the Fox Theater means a lot to me, and when I think of what my vocation really ended up being, it really was all about the theater, and it always was all about the theater. And everything I've done, of all the things I've done, it's the most hours I've spent has been in a theater, taking classes, doing improv, doing plays, doing stand-up. Even when I got on Saturday Night Live, we had a studio audience, and to me, that was a theater. I played to the audience, and it was always surprising when I left and went out in the world, and people could see what we were doing inside that theater. And so it's just so great to be here. What a wonderful place. Okay, I'll stop. The fox is going, "Stop it, stop it." I know, I'm gorgeous. Oh, I was trying to figure out, see, my other two shows that I filmed, I used a concealed mic, like a head mic, but I wanted to use a microphone. I just love the prop of a microphone. I like being able to hold it. There's something that's sort of confessional about a microphone that's different. Don't you think there's something, I mean, it's sort of, I don't know why that is. And I love the mic, I love the stand. I like how you can be so casual. Be like that, talk like that. I love it. And I decided for this show, I wanted to carry a mic you could see. And I started thinking about mics, and I thought, why do they look like that? Because, you know, early mics, they look like the grill of a car or, you know, a suspended trampoline or something, and then they sort of landed on this shape, which I think we can agree is very phallic. And I wondered if it was because a man designed it. And I know that's another cliche that men design phallic things, but it is true. Okay. I was at this conference, and Elon Musk was giving a talk, and he had these 3 big screens behind him. It was a stage like as big as this one. And there was cameras below, and they were projecting on the screens behind him, and on the right and left, it was just projections of him in real time. And you know, he's a very handsome, tall man, and from the camera below, he really had this John Galt from Atlas Shrugged kind of look. You know, like, I'm a man with ideas and no government's gonna stop me. And the screen right behind him was an animated simulation of this rocket that he's planning to build to go to Mars. And he told us that this rocket is going to be 40 stories tall, taller than any other rocket ever built. And to just show you how big his rocket's gonna be, he showed you the next biggest rocket ever built, only 10 stories tall. And then the moderator said, so what are you calling your rocket? And he said, we're calling it the BFR, which stands for Big Fucking Rocket. And I thought, oh my God, it's not even a euphemism. Elon Musk is planning to fuck the universe. The universe is going, oh, Elon, I have waited 14 billion years to have someone evolve who really knows how to give it to me. Give it to me, Elon. So I began to wonder if a woman designed a spacecraft, would it look like a vagina? And I think the answer could possibly be yes. Okay, I saw this other panel discussion, and on it was Anne Druyan, who's the widow of Carl Sagan. And this group of people had designed a spacecraft that was going to go up and monitor weather patterns around the Earth. And it was going to run on renewable energy with these fabric solar panels. And I watched their simulation, and it was sort of butterfly-like with these folds. Sometimes it shuddered. And I thought, wow, it really makes you rethink the term space junk. See, that's when you need a mic. It really makes you rethink the term space junk. I wanted to do that 23andMe genetic ancestry thing. And I went to my husband and said, let's do it. And he said, really? We're not going to really find out anything. We're each so just who we are. I'm Eastern European, Ashkenazi Jew. You are Northern European Irish. Our daughter, who we adopted from China, is East Asian Chinese. There won't be any surprises. And I said, well, I want to do it because I think I'm a Neanderthal. And he said, why would you think that? And I said, well, I don't know if you've noticed, but I have a very prominent brow ridge. Secondly, my response to almost everything is, But thirdly, whenever I go to those natural history museums and they have, like a diorama of Neanderthals, I feel very drawn to them. They feel very familiar to me. So he agreed, and we sent off for the kit, and you have to sort of spit into this tube, and it takes 3 weeks to get the results. While I was waiting for the results, I came here to Spokane to visit my mother, who was living in a condo, and she was having some health problems, and one of the health problems she was having required a nurse to come to the condo a couple of times a week and rewrap this foot. And while I was here with her, just to make conversation, I said, we did this 23andMe genetic ancestry thing. And she said, how much did you pay for that? Which I should have been ready for. That's the first question she asks about everything. And I said, well, Mom, we got the whole health profile and everything. I think it was like $140 each or something. And she said, Julie, you paid way too much for that. If you wait for it 2 times a year in the Spokesman Review, there is a coupon for $29.99, and you can go to Walmart and get the exact same thing done. And I said, really? Walmart is doing the genetic ancestry thing? And she said, yes, and I happen to know all about it because my Filipino nurse just did it. Okay, I have to take a moment out from this story and explain to you that my mother, who is Irish American, first generation, her father came from Dublin, lots of family in Ireland. And if you are not Irish American ancestry, she will refer to you by your ethnicity or your race or your country of origin before your profession from now until the end of time. No matter how many times I've met that person. So it will be like the Japanese doctor, the Mexican cab driver, the Danish baker, which was always confusing to me. Was that a baker from Denmark or a baker who just made Danishes? Or the black air conditioner repairman? Or the German butcher, which I never liked. Does he have to be a German butcher? Please, Mother. Or she would always refer to my daughter as her Chinese granddaughter. And I'd say, Mom, just say granddaughter. And she said, well, I will call her my favorite Chinese granddaughter. Once I was doing a play off Broadway in New York, and my mother came to see it, and afterwards she said, during the intermission, I went up to this man and I said, you look just like Tevye. I go, you did? And I said, what did he say? And she said, he said, I'm going to take that as a compliment. And I said, okay. A few days later, my friend Rhonda called me and said, my mother and her boyfriend went to your show off Broadway, and during the intermission, some lady came up to my mother's boyfriend and said, you look just like Tevye. Can you believe that? And I said, I can believe that because I know the person who said that. Okay, so the point is, her Filipino nurse will always be her Filipino nurse. So I said, so what happened? And she said, well, she sees me Tuesday, Thursday at 1 o'clock. And Tuesday, Thursday at 11 a.m., she sees this 90-year-old Italian guy up on the north side. Well, a couple months ago, she showed up and said, gosh, Jerry, I have a story for you. I was working on my Italian guy's foot, and in the middle of it, he leaned down and said, hey, I think you might be my daughter. And I said, what? And she said, yes. And then she told me that he told her, I knew your parents when they were alive, and you probably don't know this, but your parents were separated for a short time. By the way, that's my favorite sentence in this entire story. Okay. And during that time, your mother and I fell deeply in love. But she would not come away and marry me, maybe because I was already married and had 6 children. And I said, oh my God, so what happened? And my mother said, listen, I told her, 2 times a year in the Spokesman Review. There is a coupon for $29.99, and you can go to Walmart and find out. And I said, oh, you're talking about a paternity test. And she said, yes, ancestry, DNA. And I said, so what happened? And she said, it was true. Only a week later, here comes this coupon. And Julie, I got my scissors out, I cut it out, I put it on the bulletin board. I was so proud, and then I gave it to her. I said, and she said, it was true again. They got the discount. I thought they wouldn't get it. By the time they coordinated their schedules to go down to Walmart together, I think they wouldn't get it for $29.99, but they did. I said, and she said, oh, yeah, he's her father. I said, oh my God. And she said, oh, Julie, don't be so puritanical. Things happen in this world. You're so naive. And I said, well, at least you should start calling her your Filipino-Italian nurse from now on. Or why don't you just call her by her first name, Mom? What's her first name? And she said, oh, it's Filipina. And I said, it is? And she said, yes. Oh, Julie, that's a very common name for women from the Philippines. I'm surprised you don't know that, living in all those big, sophisticated cities like you do. But I guess you don't spend as much time around people from other cultures like I do. She gets me every time. Okay, I came back home, and we got our results back from 23andMe, and it was true. There were no surprises. Michael, 100% Ashkenazi Jew. Mulan, East Asian Chinese. Me, Neanderthal. That's right, people. I got an email that said, congratulations, Julia Sweeney, you're in the top 2% of all people with Neanderthal DNA. And because we checked a little box sharing our health information with each other, Michael got an email, the subject headline of which was, Julia Sweeney is 98% more Neanderthal than you. So I said, well, I guess my ancestors were more open to fraternizing with others than your ancestors were. I know how the Jews have all those rules about not dating outside your species. They'd say, who's this hairy shiksa you brought home? Okay, I am so glad you laughed at that. I didn't know if by marrying a Jewish man I had the right to tell Jewish jokes. Michael said you might want to stick to the Irish alcoholic jokes, which we both know are a bottomless flask of material, never to be exhausted. I said, I see what you did there. But actually, that's not even true. I was in Dublin, and I did this radio show, and I'm trying to play up my Irish connection. And I said, I went and looked up the census of 1910. I was looking at my great-grandfather and my grandfather. And under profession for my great-grandfather, it said plasterer. And to be funny, I said, I was just so relieved it didn't say plastered. You guys, this silent Paul comes over the radio studio. And the host says, Julia Sweeney, we don't really appreciate those kinds of stereotype Irish alcoholic jokes here in Ireland. And I said, I need a drink. Let's go to another country, shall we? A few years before the pandemic, Michael, Mulan, and I went to Vietnam on a trip, and this was a really big deal for us. And I really wanted to know as much as I could know before we went. And I thought it was really important that our whole family watched Ken Burns' documentary on the American War in Vietnam on PBS, all 18 hours of it, for the laughs. And my strategy for us to watch it was that I was going to make dinner 3 times a week and be able to watch it in front of the TV, and we'd watch like an hour at a time, and then over a month we would have watched the whole thing. And it was incredibly good. It really should be required watching for all Americans. It's so good and sad and important. And at one point, about 5 or 6 hours in, Mulan turned to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Why are we going there? It seems like they should hate us. Why are we going there?" And I said, it does seem like they should hate us. And then she said, "And why are we watching this while we're eating dinner?" And Michael said, "Well, that's what we did when it was happening. We ate dinner and watched the war. This is the perfect way to watch this documentary." Well, we went to Hanoi. We spent a week there. It's a wonderful, vibrant, incredible city. I could totally live there. It was great. We went and visited Ho Chi Minh, which is their founding communist leader, where they've preserved his body, as the communists like to do. And we stood in this long line, and when we got to the front, Mulan was reading this little card that said, "Every cell of his body is filled with a combination of formaldehyde and wax." And I said, "Now I understand all the no smoking signs." We wouldn't want to blow up Ho Chi Minh now. We got up to the body, and Mulan goes, "Wow, what a way to go." And Michael said, "Or not to go." We left there, and we went to visit the Hanoi Hilton, which is the nickname for the war prison that they had. Like John McCain spent 7 years there. Also harrowing, difficult to see, very important. We left there, we're walking through Hanoi, and I look up, and I see a Hilton, a real Hilton. And it looks kind of new, like 10 or 20 years old, a Hanoi Hilton. And I thought, oh my God, what were the conversations like at Hilton headquarters in New York when they were deciding to build this? Did someone say, "We seem to have very good brand awareness in Hanoi"? I couldn't stop driving Michael and Mulan crazy as we walked around Hanoi, coming up with marketing ideas for the Hanoi Hilton. "When you feel our 1,000 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets, you're gonna yell, 'Lock me up.'" Or I thought maybe the do not disturb signs could say solitary confinement. But my best idea was to have Hilton do a cross-marketing campaign with Hostess cupcakes. And instead of those little chocolates that they leave on your pillow at night, they could leave little Ho Chi Minhs. Come on, people! Okay. Mulan was like, "Please, mother, shut up. Will you please stop?" And it turns out that the Vietnamese really do not hate the Americans at all. In fact, they love the Americans. At one point, Michael turned to me and said, "Do you want to see the B-52s?" And I said, "Oh my God, the B-52s are playing in Hanoi?" And he said, "No, there's a museum of crashed B-52s." And Mulan said, "Why? Why do they love us so much? I don't get it." And I said, "Well, now that I've been reading a lot more Vietnamese history, I have some ideas. One is the people they really hate, are the people who've been invading them for the last 1,000 years, the Chinese. So Mulan, it's really you and your people." She was like, "Oh!" I said, "Next, they hate the French, who colonized them and subjugated them for 120 years. But Mulan, the French brought the baguette from France to Vietnam, and it allowed for the invention of these incredible banh mi sandwiches, which are to die for." And Mulan said, "I think a lot of people did die for them." And I said, "I know, but they're so good. Oh my God, they're so good." So when I was 40, my life was going pretty good. I had a little bungalow in Hollywood, about 1,200 square feet. I was getting regular work, and I would say I had a lot of control and and really a lot of peace in my life. And I guess I must have thought, how can I fuck this up? Well, it took me about 2 years to do it. I adopted a little toddler from China, 18 months old, Mulan, which, by the way, I did not name her Mulan. I had my own ideas of names. I went to China, and they said, well, her Chinese name is Mulan. And I said, like the Disney animated film? And they said, well, it's an ancient, beautiful Chinese name. And I said, I work in Hollywood, and I'm in show business, and I can't have a kid where everyone will think it's the only Chinese name I could think of. She can't be Mulan. But she was, and I came back to Hollywood, and I was introducing her as Mulan, and people would say, like the Disney animated movie? And I would say, oh, no, well, yes, well, blah, 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 the whole story that I just told you. And then I got so tired of that, I just started saying, yes, like the Disney animated film. So, of course, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Being a single mom, I needed a lot of help, much more than I thought. And I got a lot of help. I had a full-time nanny, I had a part-time assistant, and I had my beloved Margarita, who came every Friday to clean the house. But that meant I had 3 salaries to pay. And in show business, you never know if every job you get is the last job you're ever gonna have, so I felt like I had to say yes to everything. And there were many, many days when I had been working like 12 hours, and I would come up the front walk, and through the glass window I could see Mulan, and she would drop her toys and then burst into tears because me coming home meant the nanny was leaving. I know! And then within the hour, I was crying too, for the exact same reason. Mulan and I both standing on the porch saying, please don't go, please. Please don't go. I think Mulan really thought of us kind of like a couple. And I remember when she was 5, we went to this dinner party, and there were like 8 adult couples, like 16 people, and then us on this long wooden table, me and Mulan. And at the end of the dinner, it was a Sunday night, she sort of yawned, and she put her arm around me very proprietarily. And she leaned in and said, hey, this was a lovely evening, but I've got kindergarten in the morning, 8 o'clock, and I think you've got to be on the set, too, at like 7, right? Okay, we're going to have to call it a night. And when we were driving home, Mulan said, why did everyone laugh when I said that we had to leave? And I said, well, it was just, kind of the way you said it. It was sort of like we were a couple. And she said, but we are a couple. When Mulan was 6, I met Michael, a scientist in the Chicago area. He had a business making a very sophisticated scientific instrument that I still do not understand what that is. And we fell in love. And he started flying out from Chicago to visit us. And Mulan really liked him at first. But then, when he was kind of hanging around a lot more than she really wanted him to, and worse, when she realized that he was taking attention away from her, my attention was going to him too, she really didn't like it. And if Michael and I were holding hands, she'd come up and pull our hands apart and put her hand in my hand. And one time I turned around the hallway, and Michael was sitting in this chair, and Mulan was standing on the side saying, get out of our lives. Oh my God. Okay, he eventually was able to win her over. He taught her how to ride a bike. He helped her with her 2nd grade science project, comparing bubble gums. But in the end, I think they really bonded, really kind of the way we all bond, by trash talking a third party. One once they realized that they could get together and talk about all the things they didn't like so much about me, they became very close. Basically, we triangulated, and it was a beautiful thing, and I realized that 3 is a much better number to be in close quarters with than 2. With 3, there's always somebody not there that you can talk about. It made me understand how the Holy Trinity had to be the Holy Trinity. I really could imagine the Holy Ghost being away and Jesus saying to God, if that Holy Ghost eats with his mouth open, one more time! And God saying, I know, right? Also, Mulan and I could bond by talking about the things we didn't like about Michael. His whispery voice, his exasperating exactness about anything, even slightly technical, his slight tendency to be a know-it-all. I don't have a joke in there for that. I just enjoy talking about what bothers me about my husband on stage. That one's for me. So Michael and I decided to get married, and we had to think who could be the officiant to marry us. Now, our friends are mostly secular atheists. Michael's family, secular Jews, and my family, a lot of devout Catholics. And I realized that we needed an officiant who could at least appear to be a man of God for those who needed it. A wolf in shepherd's clothing, if you will. I realized I had to get my good friend Don Novello to do it as Father Guido Sarducci. And he did. And you guys, it was fantastic. To all the atheists in attendance, they thought, wow, that guy's really making fun of religion. To all the Jews in attendance, they thought, wow, that guy's really making fun of Catholics. And to all the Catholics in attendance, they thought, that priest is so funny. Everyone was satisfied. So we got married, and we really didn't have a plan of how we were going to live together for a while. Michael was still traveling back and forth. And after a few months, Michael came to me and said, listen, if you and Mulan will move to the Chicago area for at least 10 years, or when Mulan graduates from high school, which is about the time I plan to retire, I can be the breadwinner. And you guys, that was the first time in my life where someone was asking me if I was willing to be the bread eater. And I love bread. I have no issues with bread. I have no gluten issues, no ego issues. Bring me the bread. Yes. So Mulan and I packed up our house and we rented it out, and Michael and Mulan and I started our odyssey. And I actually mean that literally. We went to Honda of Hollywood and bought an Odyssey minivan. And that's how I found myself at, age 49, driving to the Midwest where I'd never lived before with a man I realized I did not really know very well to start a whole new life. And we bought a house in Wilmette, which is one city up on the North Shore from Evanston, this old Victorian house with a white picket fence. It had this place in the basement that I could turn into a home theater, which is my personal church. I called it Our Lady of the Flickering Light. And you guys, I just started this whole new life. Mulan started 3rd grade around the corner at this local public school. And I really took my job seriously as a homemaker and a housewife. And I cooked, I cleaned, I made dinner, I planned meals. I had ideas for fun things for us to do on the weekend. I made doctor and dentist appointments, and then I took people to those appointments. I volunteered at the school. I did the carpool. I really did it. And it was actually a lot harder than I thought it would be, but it was very creative and very satisfying. And actually, I feel so lucky that I was able to do that. Of course, it wasn't always great. there were those days when I was like scrubbing the kitchen floor, when I looked back on my old life and all those people that I had working for me, and I thought, wow, if Margarita had only known that I must have been thinking, if I play my cards right, I'm gonna get your job. And there were those days where they really just were driving me crazy. I couldn't stand them, and I would think, you mean I have to think up dinner and shop for dinner and cook dinner and serve dinner, and then they expect me to sit down and make sparkling conversation with them? And that's when I discovered the miracle of drinking. I realized that if about 5 o'clock, say, I had a glass of red wine, 6 to 8 ounces, that's my drink, while I was chopping the vegetables for dinner, it was incredible what 8 ounces of red wine could do to my mood. Like, I would go from thinking, these people are sucking the life out of me. I used to be an interesting, vibrant woman, and now all I say to people is there anything else I can get for you? 8 ounces of wine later, I'd think, my life is so beautiful. Look at Mulan. She'll never be 11 in October again. And look at my handsome husband. How did I get such a handsome husband? You guys, 8 ounces of liquid can do that. Now, if you have a second glass of wine, little irritations will start poking through the veil. You cannot have a third glass of wine. If you have a third glass of wine, you will immediately be just as irritated as you were before your first glass of wine, but now you don't give a fuck if they hear about it. Yeah. Okay, I just want to say that I think that Michael and I, all in all, have a very good marriage. I really only seriously consider divorce, I would say, 2 times a year, you know, like where you do the calculations. And I think that puts us in the top 10% of happiest couples anywhere. And you know what? Michael says he feels the exact same way about me. So, when I moved to Wilmette, and I really just turned my back on my Hollywood life. I mean, it was easy for me to do, and I didn't really think about it that much, and I didn't bring it up that much. And we're not really a pop culture family. We're kind of a PBS NewsHour, you know, like Jeopardy kind of family. So it just didn't come up. I mean, Mulan knew that I was an actress. She'd gone to the set with me a couple of times, but we didn't bring it up. Okay, when Mulan was in 7th grade, she came home from school and said, Mom, some kids on the playground came up to me and said that you were famous. I said, a little bit. Less every day. And she said, and they said that you were on this TV show in New York called Saturday Night Live. Yeah, that's right. And she said, and then they said you were most famous for playing this character who's fat and drools all the time, and you can't tell if it's a man or a woman. And I said, that's your mom. So I said, okay, Mulan, yes, I was famous for playing this character, and, you know, it could be in the future if people find out I'm your mother, they'll bring it up. We made a movie. It was a huge bomb at the box office, but I had a lot of fun making it. And I have a DVD of it, so let's go down to the basement, and we'll watch it, and then you'll understand what this character is all about. So we go down to the basement. I put in the DVD. Well, first of all, it is a terrible movie. Okay. It took me only a mere 25 years to admit it. But yeah, it's pretty awful. Okay. And we're watching the movie, and every once in a while, I would look over, and in the irises of Mulan's eyes, I could see Pat going, ugh. And then, every once in a while, I could feel Mulan do this. The movie ends, and Mulan says, I don't know, it really seems like that character is just making fun of somebody for not knowing if it's a man or a woman. And this huge wave of defensiveness came over me, and I said, oh, no. We're making fun of the people for whom it is so important to know whether Pat's a man or a woman. And she said, I don't know. And I said, Mulan, the theme song, a ma'am or a sir, accept him or her, whoever it might be. And she said, I don't know. And I said, Mulan, the gay community embraced Pat. I was the grand marshal at 4 different gay pride parades. Mulan, Katie Ling came to me herself and told me how much she loved Pat. And Mulan, when Prince changed his name to that glyph and no one knew what the hell to call him anymore and everyone at Paisley Park started calling him Pat, he liked it! And she said, I don't know. So for a few days afterwards, I walked around going, oh my God, what did I do? Holy shit. Was I the Al Jolson of androgyny? God damn it! Ugh. A few years later, I got a call from the Today Show, and they said, Julia, Halloween's coming up. We love the character Pat. Would you like to come on the show and do Pat? And I said, can you do Pat now? And they said, of course you can. Why not? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, do you have any Pat sketch ideas we could do? And I said, oh, God, I haven't thought about the Pat character in so long. Pat's older, like me, and has gray hair like I have. And maybe Pat's partner looks exactly like Pat. And not only can you not tell if Pat's a man or a woman, you can't even tell if it's Pat or Pat's partner. And they said, okay, that seems very confusing. I said, okay. Okay, how about this? I always wanted to do this. Pat is somewhere, and there's a gay pride information booth, and we watch Pat go up to it, and we find out that Pat is really homophobic. And the woman says, we can't do anything disparaging toward gay people. And I said, no, that Pat. Okay, forget it. Okay. Okay, how about this? Pat has sex reassignment surgery, and afterwards, Pat looks exactly the same. What about that? And they're like, well, we had this idea that one of our hosts would also dress up as Pat, and you could recreate the mirror sketch from Duck Soup with Groucho and Harpo Marx, and that was actually a really great idea, and I went to New York and did it, and it was actually a really good time. Okay, looking back on it, what shocks me the most about myself, okay, so the Pat outfit is this cottony, billowy fat suit, and then these pants and shirt that go over it, and a wig and the glasses. That's basically it. Okay, I had gone to the Container Store and bought a plastic box. I put the Pat outfit on it and put it under the steps in the basement. And about once a year, I'd be walking by and stop and say, contain yourself, Pat! And when they asked me to do this Today Show thing, I just took that box and took it with me to New York. It never even occurred to me to try the outfit on. It didn't even occur to me to do that. And of course, I'm much larger than I was the last time I played Pat. So I want you to imagine me in the NBC wardrobe department with a very cold, I felt, persnickety wardrobe person standing looking at me while I'm trying to get the pants over the top of the fat suit, struggling. Ah! And finally he said, listen, I think we need to make an entirely new Pat outfit, or would you consider not wearing the fat suit? My worst nightmare. If I could only have imagined myself back. In 30 years' time, you'll be back here, but you won't need the fat suit then. Oh my God. Okay. So, of course, I have, like many people, struggled with my weight my whole life for the most part. And it seems like for years and years, I would go on about 2 diets a year, lose 10 to 12 pounds, and then gain it all back, plus a couple more. So I don't know, does dieting work? I don't know. Okay. After the Today Show thing, Michael started reading about fasting. Fasting was the way. Fasting was gonna reset your set weight point. It was gonna break your insulin resistance. And we decided to go on a full 5-day fast together. Only coffee in the morning, that's it, nothing else. Who knew that not doing something could take up all of your time, concentration, and energy and be very difficult? Okay, we did it. I remember once I was sitting on this chair and Mulan walked by and said, can I get a ride to piano? And I said, can't you see I'm very busy not eating right now? It is taking all of my time. I am sitting here and I'm looking at that clock for 5 days. Okay, at the end of 5 days, Michael, nearly 6 feet tall, starting weight a little over 150 pounds, lost 8 pounds. Me, won't tell you my starting weight, of course, lost 4 pounds. The next morning, I got up and ate a muffin, gained back 3.5 pounds. In the meantime, Michael's walking around going, wow, I feel great. That was practically effortless. I said, well, we are now officially Jack Spratt and his wife. I hope you like that look, because that's what we are now. And I started thinking, I don't really know anyone who's gone on a really big fast, except for Jesus, who we know went to the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and fasted before he was crucified. And I said to Michael, you know, now that I've been on a 5-day fast, I actually can see how you could not eat food for 40 days, but not drink anything. I mean, come on, you'd have to drink at least water or you would die, right? And Michael, ever the scientist, said, well, you know, fat itself has a very high water content, so depending. And I said, you don't think that Jesus was morbidly obese, do you? And he thought, I'm about to be crucified. That's the picture everyone's gonna have of me from now until the end of time. I've got to do something! Get me to the desert! We don't know. We don't know. All right, I was raised Catholic, and actually it was all in all a really good experience. As I said, I wanted to be a nun for a little while in high school. And now, of course, I am a nun whenever I have to check off those boxes that says what your religious affiliation is, and I check none. Me and me have a good laugh. Oh, Julia, you did become a nun. Yes, you're finally a nun. Basically, I made the mistake in my late 30s of deciding to read the entire Bible cover to cover, and I emerged an atheist. I will say that once I looked at the Bible as a very influential historical religious document, it exploded in my mind and is incredibly fascinating, and it still fascinates and interests me to this day. But for my parents, who were and are devout Catholics, it was a very hard thing for me to say I was an atheist. And part of it is the word. It's a hard word. Like in America, it's like saying, I hate puppies and flowers. So that's really hard. And my mother called me and said, Julie, you are not an atheist. In fact, you are so Catholic that you won't even give yourself the pleasure of believing in God. And that's a little true, I have to say. Okay, all right, I'll give you that one. One day she called me and said, did you ever think this? That if there wasn't a God, we'd have to invent one? And I said, well, yes, Voltaire said that, and he was an atheist, so I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to say. And she said, don't you think everyone in church hasn't had all the same thoughts you've had? And I said, I don't know. Have they? And she said, of course they've had. And I said, well, I'm not going to pretend to believe. Are you saying everyone in church is pretending to believe? And she said, I'm saying, why do you have to talk about it? And I said, well, I'm not going to pretend to believe. I mean, then it wouldn't actually be belief. And she said, that's where you're wrong. That's exactly what it is. Make believe. And I said, okay, now I'm really confused. And she said, well, that's the first true thing you've said. You are so naive. So the first one-person show I did on Broadway, there was a film, was God Said Ha. It was all about me having cancer and my brother having cancer. And after I did that show, I unexpectedly got all these gigs speaking at sort of cancer-related events, like an oncology nurses convention, or a pharmaceutical convention, or the opening of a comprehensive cancer center. And I would come and do like 30 minutes of my show, and it was really fascinating, really interesting. I learned a lot about the healthcare system, and it was lucrative for me, so it was great. The second big one-person show I did was called Letting Go of God, and that was all about going from being a Catholic to a non-believer. And after I did that show, which was on Showtime and everything, all the cancer gigs dried up. And I said to my agent, what gives? Where's all my cancer gigs? And Paul said, listen, I think it's because of you being an atheist. I think people think atheists have even less hope than people with cancer do. I said, oh my God, all right. But then a few years later, Paul called me and said, listen, I have an offer for you. It's not a lot of money, but it's a good message, so you might want to do it. It's for this ladies' society luncheon in Bismarck, North Dakota, and they're promoting awareness of the cervical cancer vaccine, and that's the cancer that I had, so I want to promote awareness of the vaccine, so that's all good. So I said, oh yes, of course I would love to do something like that. And he said, but wait, the woman who's organizing it is really freaked out that you're an atheist, and she wants to have a conference call so we can all be on the same page before she actually books you. So I said, okay. So we had this conference call, and she said, listen, I cannot have you coming to Bismarck, North Dakota, and saying that you're an atheist because this is a government-sponsored event. And I said, okay, well, I don't really know what that has to do with it, but I'm just going to do the cancer material, so I wouldn't say that. And she said, good. Also, I read through your script, and you say a bad word. And I cannot have a bad word because this is a government-sponsored event. And I said, oh, what is the bad word that I say? And she said, at one point you say, when the shit hits the fan. And I said, okay, I'll just say, when the crap hits the fan. And she said, you can't say crap. This is a government-sponsored event. And I said, well, what do you suggest that I say? And she said, you're going to have to say when that stuff hits the fan. So I said, all right. Okay, I go to Bismarck, North Dakota, I walk in, the first thing I notice, everyone's wearing crucifixes. It's just sort of a shock. I know it's a cultural thing, but everyone, all these women on these round tables with the bouquet in the hotel ballroom are wearing crucifixes, some of them bejeweled crucifixes. It really makes me wish Jesus could come down from heaven and I could say, Jesus, look at the matrons of Bismarck, North Dakota, showing their allegiance and status, wearing jewelry in the shape of the torture device that killed you. Look at this woman. Her crucifix has diamonds and little rubies where your hands and feet were. Oh. Okay. You guys. So the woman that I had the conference call with starts the conference, and she gets up and she says, before we begin, I would like us all to bow our heads for a non-denominational prayer. Dear Jesus in heaven who came down. Yes! Yes. Okay, I get up, I do my 30 minutes. I have a little devil on my shoulder the whole time saying, stop in the middle of your set and yell, there is no God! But I don't. I'm a good girl. I do what I'm told. And then after me, this woman came up and gave a talk. And her talk was how to bring humor into the lives of your loved ones who have cancer. And unfortunately, I do not think she had a sense of humor herself. And I know it's a little mean, but I have to do her for you. Okay. Having cancer is so sad. Very sad. Many people ask me, what can I do for my loved one who has cancer? And I'm here to tell you the best thing you can do is to make them laugh. I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you to show you how to make your loved one with cancer laugh. Tell them a joke. There are joke books. You could buy one, find a joke, and tell them. Give them a humorous card. I've noticed at the grocery store, there's a special section for humorous cards. You could find one that makes you laugh and give it. Tickle them. Oh my God. Okay, I've had cancer. I have cared for many people with cancer. We don't want to be tickled. Oh my God. I became a little obsessed with that woman, I have to say. I would always be going on her website. Mulan would be saying, what are you on that cancer lady's website? I go, Mulan, I just have to find out if she has any new tips for how to make people with cancer laugh. You might think that because I had all this time to shepherd Mulan around to her various classes and sit there and wait, that I might be considered a helicopter mom. But I don't think so. And my defense is this: I really didn't care how she did in any of her classes. My feeling was, she wanted to take a class. I was perfectly happy to pay for it. I was perfectly happy to drive her there. I loved sitting in the waiting room reading a magazine. I think that was my happiest hours of mothering. But I'm not gonna rah-rah somebody into some kind of performance. It's just, I guess I would define my style as a parent as lost in thought great aunt with a lot of time on her hands. Also, I didn't care about grades. I know there has to be some way to measure whether a student knows something, but I just hate tests. I hate grades. I think the whole thing is awful. The competition for it, I purposely would not ask Mulan ever about grades. When her grades were delivered to the house in an envelope, I left them on the desk in the front area. I would not even open it. It's a signal how much I don't care. And Michael pretty much feels the same as me, so that was good. So I really had no idea what kind of grade point average Mulan had till she was a junior in high school and she started thinking about colleges. And that's when I found out she had a solid A-, B+ average. Wow, I think that's fantastic. But not to Mulan, who also didn't really think about grades. And once she understood that there were a certain few colleges that she probably wouldn't be able to get into or something, and some of her friends were applying to those, she got very upset. And she came to me and said, "Why didn't you tell me to just get all A's? If you had told me, I would have just done it." And I said, "Really, Mulan? Get all A's? That is so not my style." And she said, "Mom, you don't understand. I'm Chinese. People have certain expectations. By all rights, I should have gotten a tiger mother, but instead I got you a house cat mother." Well, I said, "Well, I do enjoy a nap. And I'm fascinated by laser pointers." But also, Mulan, I hate this whole big treadmill. I hate the university system in America. I think it exists mostly to keep the class system in place. I hate all of it. In fact, Mulan, I wish you would take what they call a gap year after high school. Like, don't just stay on the treadmill doing stuff. Do something different. Like, if you worked for, like, Mayflower Moving for a year, my God, that would be an education. What if you worked as a nanny for a year, nannying a couple of little kids? That would be a big education. Or, oh my God, you could work at the Gap for your gap year. That would be worth it for the jokes alone, Mulan. She goes, "Mom, I want to go to a state university. I want to go to a state university with a great engineering program. I want to be a computer science engineer." I said, "Mulan, a computer science engineer? Is there any future in that? What about poetry? Abstract watercolor painting? What about cheese making?" Okay, I bring up those last two things because I have a friend who has a daughter in a very elite Eastern college that's $75,000 a year, and she's majoring in abstract watercolor painting and cheese making. Now, in that girl's defense, I would totally love to major in those things. I would add a minor in silent Swedish film. Now, I think the scariest thing in my entire parenting time was when Mulan learned to drive. I don't know why they don't warn you about it. It was absolutely, truly terrifying. I took her out in the Odyssey minivan. I tried to calmly explain how things worked. She was so bad. She was such a bad driver. I kept thinking, my God, Mulan, you have spent at least 10,000 hours sitting behind me in this minivan. Have you not noticed anything that happens up here? Anything. What about the hundreds of dollars I have spent on dance classes? Do you have no spatial awareness from those classes? She would often break down in tears. I would shriek a lot, which probably wasn't helpful. At one point, she pulled off to the side and said, "Mom, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can learn to drive." And I said, "Oh, Mulan, maybe you can't." And she said, "Mom, you're supposed to be encouraging." I said, "Well, do you have to drive? I mean, live in a city with a good public transportation system. live in New York City. Or what about our friend Annie in Chicago? She doesn't drive, she gets around everywhere. My God, self-driving cars are gonna be here before you know it. I said, Mom, I want to drive. And I said, okay, at least let us go practice where the people are already dead. Let's go to the cemetery. So we went to Calvary Cemetery in Evanston, and it just so happens that my family on my dad's side has a family crypt there that has 7 of my great aunts and my great grandparents, the Ryan family. And as we would drive around Calvary Cemetery, as we would approach that crypt, I swear to God, the crypt went like this. Ah, 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 ah. Finally, Mulan said, you are the worst, Mom. You are the worst teacher. And I said, well, you know what? I'm not good at everything. Turns out when you're a mom, you're good at some things, not good at other things. She goes, I'm having Dad teach me. And I was like, good. So Michael took her out. When she was about 16 and a half, I'd say, she said, okay, I think I'm ready to take the driver's test. And I thought, good, let's have a professional tell her she can't drive. I mean, I don't want to be the bad guy. So we went out to the Northbrook DMV. Michael and I are waiting. I'm really ready to console her. She comes around this hallway. She's waving this piece of paper. She says, I passed, I passed. I was so shocked. I wanted to run in and say, on behalf of the citizens of Chicago, do not give this girl her driver's license. Please. But instead, I had to act, all happy and supportive. Oh, great. That's so great. We went to Yogurtland and got a sundae. And Mulan's just all babbling along, Oh, now I can drive myself to piano, and now I can drive myself to dance, and now I can drive myself to my friends' houses. And I was eating my sundae, and I thought, I can die now. And I thought, no. I can live now. I can live now. And I felt like I was breaking the surface of some water that I had been underneath for about 14 and a half years. And I was breathing for the first time going, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free. And I had this elated feeling. It was really like almost a bipolar experience of happiness. And as I'd walk around Wilmette, I'd see these young mothers with their little children. There are so many children in Wilmette. I don't understand why. It's not like it's Logan, Utah, where you have religion to explain it all. There are so many children. And I would see these young mothers, and I'd smile. And I'd think, I know you think you're happy, and you say you're happy, but I know you're in hell. And I'm free! I'm free! Or if I was getting on a plane and somebody was getting on with a baby, I'd give my little grandmotherly smile. And inside I think, I don't have to keep that baby quiet on this plane. I'm free. I had no idea that raising a kid to independence was going to give you this dividend of euphoria for the rest of your life, that you're not doing that anymore. Okay, so Mulan, we went with Mulan, Michael and I, on 12 different college tours. And then she chose a college, not one of those college tours that we went on. She came to me and said, Mom, I've decided to go to the Ohio State University. They have a great engineering program, and I want to be part of it. And I said, Ohio State University? And she said, the Ohio State University. And I said, yeah, Ohio. Where is Ohio again? Is it the east? It's sort of Midwest. I need to look at a map. Now, you may think that it's sort of disparaging of me to not know where Ohio exactly is. But to those people in Ohio, I ask, do you know where Spokane, Washington is? I don't think so. I think you might need to get out a map. Okay, so I go, okay. We get the bill for her tuition in the spring for the fall, and I'm looking it over, and it says we've added $200 to the standard tuition for football tickets, for season football tickets. And I go to Mulan and say, that is ridiculous. How can they just assume that you want to go to the football game? I am going to call and say, no, we're not paying $200 for season football tickets. And she said, well, really? I mean, should we do that? And I said, oh, Mulan, I went to one football game at the University of Washington, and as I left, I thought, I will never go or watch a football game again as long as I live. And I have kept that promise to myself. And she said, well, what was so horrible about it? And I said, oh my God, Mulan, it's horrible. The stands are filled with screaming people. It's a little like the Nuremberg rallies, I imagine. It is terrifying. And she said, but why do you think I wouldn't like it? And I said, because you're 18 years old, you have never shown any interest in organized sports in your entire life. I mean, I really don't think you're going to like it. And she said, well, I'm going to check it out, and I'm sure I can sell the tickets if I need to, if I don't like it. And I said, well, I can't wait to hear what you think. Okay. She goes off to college. I get a call late on a Saturday. I think she's crying. She's like, Mom. I go, what? What's happened? She goes, I went to my first football game. I said, huh? What do you think? She goes, it is the greatest game. It is the most wonderful game, football. Mom, it's so interesting, and it was so exciting. And then, you guys, it was like she had downloaded a new language in only like 4 hours. Like, she had all the language. Like, she was going, the halfback got sidelined. I don't even know what I'm saying. At the 30-yard line, and the tight end got blah, blah, blah. I was like, how did you learn all these terms? And she goes, Mom, in the last few seconds, the other team desperately threw a Hail Mary pass. I said, a Hail Mary pass. Mulan, I think a Hail Mary pass is when God came to Mary and asked if she was interested in becoming the mother of Jesus. We call that the Annunciation, Mulan. In fact, I think Mary should have given God a hard pass. She's like, Mom, stop it. She goes, listen, it was incredible. I love this game. I love it so much. I want you and Dad to come to Columbus, Ohio, and watch a football game. And I said, okay. I went to Michael. Michael has never been to a football game in his entire life, even less knowledge than me. Okay. I said, Michael, first I just want to remind you how much we love our daughter, Mulan. We love her, our Mulan. It seems that Mulan is a football fan. Now, we didn't raise her that way. But kids, they go out in the world and they find themselves in ways you might not expect. She would like us to go to Columbus, Ohio, and watch a football game. Afterwards, there's a parade of pride. He says, okay. We go to Columbus. As we're walking in the stadium, Michael is reading the Wikipedia entry for American football. An irregular shaped ball is passed between two teams. Actually, it is great. I do see it. I think it was great. I thought, well, I guess I have to be in my late 50s to finally understand why it's so great. I like the shoulder pads. I like the narrow waists of the men. I like the tight pants on their derrieres. What's not to like? I looked at the stands and I thought, we have probably avoided wars by having football. This is fantastic. Afterwards, I said to Mulan, your father and I enjoyed it so much that we would be willing to watch one football game per year. That's right. About a month later, Mulan calls me and says, oh my God, I've been dining out on that line of yours for weeks. And I said, what line? And she said, where you said, Dad and I love football so much that we would be willing to watch one football game per year. I said, but we do feel that way. She said, Mom, you gotta watch the game on TV. You gotta follow the team. I was like, oh, okay. I watched the Ohio State football team on TV. At one point, they focus on a young woman with her face completely painted red, wearing a very skimpy bikini top, her whole body painted red below her navel, who's gyrating in front of the camera. And as I watch, I realize it's Mulan. Oh my God! Okay, the other day, I called Mulan to just do my fact checking. Is this true? She said, Mom, not only that, I was on camera at least 6 different games doing that. She goes, my friends' parents call me and say, wow, we saw you on TV. Life can be full of surprises. Okay, so Michael, as planned, retired. We sold the house in Wilmette. We drove the Odyssey minivan back to Los Angeles. We moved into the little bungalow in Hollywood. And I went out. I tried to reintroduce myself to Hollywood. I started performing on stage again. I was doing improv shows at the Groundlings, and I did stand-up at the Improv and at Largo, and I did a show at the Geffen Playhouse. And before I knew it, I was a recurring character on 3 different TV shows, which was like my dream come true. I couldn't believe I could reclaim this career. It was just so amazing. And I loved having a retired husband. You guys, it was fantastic. He makes dinner. We can have sex in the daytime. It's like, this is great. And then COVID. Okay, so I get a call from Mulan. And she says, Mom, it's like you always said. I said, what are you talking about? It's like you always said. You know how you always said? I keep telling people, this is what my mom always said. I said, what did I say? She said, you know how whenever anyone was talking about like climate change or environmental degradation or overpopulation, you would say, it's nothing a good old worldwide pandemic can't solve. And I was like, stop saying that I said that. I was saying that from the safety of a non-pandemic world. Please stop saying I said that. And then the quarantine. Mulan came home for about 7 months. There we all were, together, so intimate. So much smaller of a house than we ever had been in. At night, we're listening to the sirens of ambulances going by. And I thought, God, just a few months ago, I was thinking about Elon Musk fucking the universe, and now the universe is fucking with us. Mulan had this boyfriend briefly, and she broke up with him. And I said, why'd you break up with him? And she said, well, he just got to be kind of annoying. And I said, oh, Mulan, I have some wisdom to share with you. I didn't really understand this till I was in my 50s, but I'm going to tell you in your 20s, and I hope you can really hear me. Everyone is annoying. Everyone. You know what it means if someone isn't annoying? It means you don't know them very well. So my mother, about a year before the pandemic, had moved from her condo into Emily Court, the only Catholic-sponsored assisted living facility in Spokane. It's the most wonderful place. They have many retired nuns there, and I love those nuns. They're so great. It has a beautiful chapel. It has signs up that say things like 3 o'clock rosary, 4 o'clock happy hour. Ah, perfect. It's really a fantastic place. But then, of course, the pandemic hit and the quarantine and all the activities, the sing-along, the nature talks, the movies, the communal dining, the masses, the rosaries all stopped. And they had to stay mostly in their rooms. And when people came in, they were all hazmated up practically. And it was very isolating. And I don't know if that's why, but I feel like that's when my mom really started to show some signs of dementia. I mean, that could have happened anyway, but it felt like it was not just a coincidence. And I tried to call my mother every single day, and at first, we just have a normal conversation, and at the end she'd say, "Oh, by the way, before you go, do you have your dad's new phone number?" And I'd say, "Well, Mom, Dad died in 2004. And she'd say, "Oh, that's right. Or she'd say, "I was looking in my address book. I have no address for Bill." And I go, "Well, Mom, Bill died in 2012. And then she'd say, "Oh, really? What did he die of?" And I said, "Well, he had alcohol and opioid use issues, and it was sort of a combination of those things. Remember, you were with him when he died." And she said, "Oh, yeah. And then sometimes she'd say, "Mike hasn't called me at all since I've moved into Emily Court." And I'd say, "Mom, Mike died in 1995. And it was really awful because, for one thing, I like to use the word died. I know a lot of people say passed away, but, for my beliefs, I like to say died, but that's a hard word. And I felt like after a while, every day, I was having to break it to her that her husband and 2 of her sons and one of her best friends, my Aunt Barbara, had all died, and it was just awful. I have a good friend, Terry Sweeney, no relation, but he's a comedian who was on SNL in the 80s. He did Nancy Reagan and a bunch of other characters. And he was telling me that he is taking care of his parents who have dementia, both of them. And he says, "I have to come out to my parents every day." He goes, "I go over there and they say, 'Who's that guy?' And I go, 'That's my husband, Lanier.' And they say, 'How can you have a husband? You're a man.' And I say, 'It's because I'm gay.' Every day." He said, "Julia, sometimes I break it to them gently, and sometimes I just scream it at them." And I felt like that a little bit. But I felt like it was important for me to keep my mother, straight with the truth. Like I was her connection to the truth, and to me that was really important. But then she went into this other phase where she wasn't asking me questions, she was telling me things. She'd say, "Well, your dad has a big trial in Yakima. He's gone for a week." And I'd say, Interesting. Or she'd say, "Bill's going on a big bike ride to the Olympic rainforest. He's working on his bike in the lobby." And I go, "Oh." She said, "Mike's living at Emily Court too. He's just a few doors down from me. He doesn't answer the door, but I can hear through the door he's watching old movies day and night." Then she called me and said, "Mike came out of his room." I said, "Mike, you're watching old movies day and night. I can hear it." And he said, "Buckle up, Mother. It's going to be a bumpy ride." And I said, "Oh, Mom, that's from All About Eve." And she said, "What?" And I said, "That's a line from All About Eve." And she said, "Oh, I think Eve did have a bumpy ride." She ate one piece of fruit she wasn't supposed to, and the whole world went topsy-turvy. But then she went to this other phase where she was asking me questions again, and she would say, like, "Your dad never came back from Kennewick. He had a trial in Kennewick. He never came back." And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I finally just said, he's in heaven. And she immediately calmed down. It was incredible how that word heaven, it was just immediately calm. She goes, oh yes, you're right, he's in heaven. Or she'd say, do you think we need to have somebody go out to the Olympic rainforest because Bill never came out? And I go, well, I think Bill's in heaven. And she'd go, oh, yes, he's riding his bike in heaven. And I'd say, yes. Or she would say something about Mike, and I would say he's in heaven, and she would calm down. And then I kind of got into it. Like, I liked thinking that. I liked talking to her about what people were doing in heaven. Or I wouldn't correct her at all. She'd call and say, your Aunt Barb and I are going to go to Bozeman today to have lunch. And instead of correcting her, I'd say, you can't drive to Bozeman for lunch. That's 6.5 hours away. You got to go to Sandpoint. Mom? I know it. Oh, my God. But then she went to this other stage, which they call exit seeking, where sometimes at night I would get a call from an Emily Court caregiver, and they'd say, your mom is at the front door. It's 1 a.m. She says she's meeting some people. And I'd say, put her on. And I go, Mom, what's going on? And she's like, Bob's up at the PI with Smitty Myers and Carol Gray. I'm going to go have a drink with them. And I go, they're at the heaven PI. There's a heaven version of PI. And they're probably thinking of you. And she'd go, oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I think this was just 6 weeks ago, and it was very cold here, and I got a call at like 1 a.m, and the caregiver said, your mom has a packed suitcase, and she says she's meeting a bus. And I'm like, put her on. I go, Mom, what are you doing? She goes, Bob's at the courthouse with the VW bus, and he's got Bill and Mike in the back, and they're waiting for me. I've got to get over there. I know. She said, Julie, I don't want to miss out. Oh, God. I said, Mom, they're in heaven. They're driving around in heaven in the VW bus. They're probably thinking of you. You're probably going to see them someday. It's all okay. I need you to go back to your room, go to sleep. Tomorrow we're going to talk about all of it. And I realized I had this additional reason to not want my mom to die. How was I going to find out what everybody was doing? I realized I didn't want to miss out. But then, a few days later, I thought, she's so good. My mother has me thinking things and saying things I vowed I would never think or say. And I'm enjoying it. I like thinking this way. She's so good. Ugh. All right, you guys. I've been thinking for a long time about how I would end the show because I know never say never, but I feel like this is my last show. And I was thinking what I felt like I wanted to say. So in January, I thought every day I'm just going to write thoughts about what I would want to say as my last show. And I wrote something every day in January. And as I was getting ready to drive, yes, the Odyssey minivan up here from LA to Spokane, I went through the office and I picked up all the papers, and they mostly were just dreck and awful, and nothing seemed right. And then I found this one page, and I thought, okay, maybe this is it. Okay. Why do I do this? Things happen by luck or pluck, and I seem to see what's funny about them. I tell the stories to friends, they laugh. I begin to shape all the stories into a narrative. It's really hard. It's not fun. It's miserable, in fact, and I think, why do I do this? But then there's this moment when the show was born. And when I tell the story, I almost float up outside myself and I hear what I'm saying. And I say, oh, yes, that's what happened. I got cancer, my brother got cancer, I lived and he died. I had faith in God, I lost it, my world was transformed. A marriage ended, I adopted a child, another marriage began. I launched the child, the second marriage found its legs, peace and love. I had a skill, I earned money from that skill. There was a pandemic and a quarantine. My mother entered the ghost world. She holds our dead in her hand, and I hold her other hand. She stands there, one foot in the abyss, the other at Emily Court. So that's what happened. That is what happened. I can stop now. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Spokane. Thank you, Spokane, for being my hometown. And thank you, Fox Theater, for being such a wonderful, sacred place. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, goodbye.